Strange lights in the sky. Reports flood in from across the globe. Flying discs, metallic saucers, and unexplainable aerial phenomena darting through the heavens at impossible speeds. Meanwhile, deep in the jungles of Central America, archaeologists uncover eerie crystal skulls, carved with precision unknown to ancient man. Are these relics remnants of a lost civilization, or something not of this earth? And now the boffins are talking interdimensional portals, parallel realms, and beings that slip between the cracks of time and space. Science fiction or science fact? One thing's certain, folks. The age of the unknown is here.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States.
As I looked up, I saw two silvery objects moving swiftly out of the northwest. The objects were very bright and about 10,000 feet in the air. I filmed the objects until they disappeared into the blue sky behind the water tank.
Went outside to find my two sons shouting, "Mummy, Mummy, there's a flying saucer." Automatically looked up to see this huge Mexican hat, and it was bright silver in color, and it had a dome.
We were all going to move on and mature into other aspects of filmmaking, and I never thought I would ever see Indiana Jones again. Which, by the way, in a sweet, nostalgic way, was fine with me at the time. But there were some people it wasn't fine with. And I think it started with the fans. I just remember people asking me, when are you making the next Indiana Jones? George Lucas had this idea for Indiana Jones, and it was basically, hey, let's do aliens. He said this will be like a B movie. It'll be like those 1950s B movies, Earth versus Flying Saucers, and all those exploitation movies that were really about government paranoia, Cold War fears and things like that, and Hollywood turned them into invaders from Mars.
Indiana Jones, the first three films, one of the best franchises ever. Iconic moments. They felt like a trilogy, even if they're quite different in tone. The first one compared with the third one, where it's full-on screwball comedy at times with his dad bowling about, but they're all brilliant. As everyone knows, they were a homage to the 1930s sort of serial adventures that would be on in Saturday mornings, and religious mythical adventures, bringing back artifacts or dealing with ancient voodoo and supernatural elements.
You'll have to tell him where the elephant's burial ground is. Trim, think!
George Lucas and Spielberg grew up with that, and so they wanted to do a homage to it and recreate what they loved on Saturday mornings, but on this modern epic scale. Great production values, star-studded, best director working at the time at the helm. George Lucas, pretty shoddy director, not a great screenwriter, but when it comes to coming up with a story, there's no one better. So it had all the ingredients to be absolutely iconic and timeless, as they are. So fast forward 20 years later, going on 30, and they want to make a new one, which they'd been toying with the ideas for years, since the early 90s. But one problem, Harrison Ford has aged about, 20 to 30 years? De-aging technology didn't exist back then, but they wouldn't necessarily even want to use de-aging. So Indiana Jones, 10 to 20 years later, would find himself right bang in the middle of the 50s.
It was the idea of taking the genre from the 1930s serials, action-adventure serials, to the B science fiction movies of the 50s, in the early 50s. And I said, if we move the whole thing into the 50s, which would be age-appropriate for Harrison, that would be the cinematic equivalent. And I wanted to rest it on a cinematic antecedent, like we did with the other one.
So George Lucas was toying around with an idea for a long, long time. Him, Spielberg, and Harrison Ford all wanted to do another installment. But by their contracts, they all had veto rights on a script, which meant they all had to be unanimous on saying, yep, this is the project, I like the idea, I like the script, let's do it. So George Lucas, since the early 90s, he was toying around with the idea of aliens and interdimensional beings being the premise for his next Indiana Jones film. Because it was the 50s, it wasn't about archaeologists looking for artifacts and, religious elements. If you're in the 50s, it was all about science fiction and flying saucer mania. So he said, fuck it, we're trading the Nazis for the Soviets and we're trading the Luftwaffe for flying saucers.
Keep your eyes on the skies, folks, because something's up there. From the deserts of Nevada to the farms of rural Iowa, Americans are reporting strange objects streaking across the heavens, shiny, spinning, and faster than anything Uncle Sam's got in the air. They call them flying saucers. Is it Soviet trickery, Martian visitors, or a new age of technology just beyond our grasp? Newspapers buzz with sightings, scientists scramble for answers, and the public? They're looking up in wonder. One thing's for sure, the sky is no longer the limit.
He started pitching Spielberg on this idea, and Spielberg was just like, nah, I don't like it. I've done Aliens. What if people just see this as another Alien film, not another Indiana Jones film? I totally get your reason, but maybe that just means we've had our day and there doesn't need to be a fourth installment. Nonetheless, George Lucas was like, no, trust me, I'll win him over. Let me try it. So he penned his first script. Spielberg kind of liked it. He didn't mind it. He still wasn't totally bought in, but he hated the name, which was Indiana Jones and the Saucer Men from Mars.
That's awful.
Well, it is awful. Do you know what? It's funny
Sounds
though.
like a 4-year-old wrote it.
Yeah, it really does. Like, when you're thinking about it, you need a bit of a wacky name as an Indiana Jones film. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's, if Temple of Doom had never come out and we were instead talking about they were planning on doing a sequel to the amazing Indiana Jones film that never needed a sequel, and it was going to be called Temple of Doom, you'd be a bit like, what?
Sounds like an iPhone game.
Yeah. But Saucerman of Mars, it is just fucking ridiculous. But I feel like Lucas was trying to lean into the more absurdist elements of the fringe of what is already a fringe group of the UFO people that I'm a part of. I love UFOs. But the more I read into it, I feel like he was actually really more into this whole field than I realised, because he was apparently a massive Ancient Astronauts fan, and he devoured books on this kind of topic. Were humans created by the Anunnaki, the ancient alien race that needed slaves to dig up gold? Was there previously a great civilization of humans that was wiped out and aliens used to teach us to build pyramids and all that shit? He loved all that stuff. And that's where a lot of this thinking was coming from. I think he was really, really into the UFO lore, because when you're as deep in as I am, you know that a lot of the biggest researchers and oldest researchers and most famous people like Jacques Vallée, the famous French UFO researcher, they're all kind of on a whole other kick of, no, these aren't aliens from another planet, they're interdimensional travelers.
That's what was the main point of disagreement with Steven Spielberg. When I met Steven Spielberg, he was about halfway through filming Close Encounters, and we had a long discussion about what UFOs could be. And of course, for him, the main point of the movie was entertainment, and it was appropriate for the UFOs to be extraterrestrial visitors. I think that from my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think they could be something much more interesting.
Which is what the beings in this film are, or eventually would be when the final version of the script finally arrived. They're never called aliens. They're interdimensional beings who come in and out of our world and are owners of just unimaginably large volumes of knowledge on everything to do with the universe.
This old-fashioned way. You will tell us. You will help us find what we seek.
Готово, товарищ полковник.
Давай!
So you've got the Soviets replacing the Nazis. You've got this interdimensional sort of UFO lore replacing the occult religious sort of elements from the original trilogy. So as a premise, I think it's fucking genius. It is perfect. It makes complete sense. filmmaking's an art form and it's subjective, so there is no true mathematical formula that you can point to where you're like, you know, the teacher says show your workings when you're in math class. But if you logically look at every decision creatively, it all makes sense to me. The reason I defend this awful film, because it is an awful film, you know, I love Ray Winston, but even he stinks in it. It had weird moments where it was nearly borrowing really obviously from The Mummy in a way, you know, a film that clearly was basically just fan fiction nearly of Indiana Jones with the names changed. You know, clearly that film was massively...
Brilliant film, though.
Oh, no, I love The Mummy.
Yeah.
But clearly, you know, so influenced by the Indiana Jones films. But it was borrowing really directly elements of that, and it was throwing in all this awful CGI, which I know I sometimes sound like I just shit on CGI for the sake of it, but it was bad CGI. You don't need CGI monkeys.
No, yeah, I agree.
Monkeys exist. I know it's not right, but fucking film in a country where the animal rights aren't good and just chuck some real monkeys in there. Even the fact that every Indiana Jones film starts off with a mini adventure that has nothing to do with the rest of the film. This film didn't. So right from the get-go, you're like, what is this shit? It does not, like, if you told me this film came out 20, 30 years later and I didn't know anything else about it, I would never believe you in a million years that Spielberg and George Lucas were both a part of it. I would think, okay, this is a money grab 30 years later, and the studios just didn't even know why the Indiana Jones original trilogy was so beloved and just bankrolled anything.
I'm thinking back to the opening sequence now. It's where they're testing nuclear bombs, isn't it? And he hides in the lead-lined fridge. If the opening sequence was a step away from what normally happens but was good, no one would say anything. It was just silly. Hiding in lead-lined smeg, whatever the mate we call those fridges. Can I go back to what you said about the first script being called Saucermen from Mars? I was just wondering how it went from being on Mars to the final version that they're interdimensional, but I guess that's the process of script writing, isn't it?
Yeah, because
it
went through a bunch of script rewrites with different script writers. Frank Darabont did a script in the late 90s, which apparently Spielberg loved, and he was like, okay, I'm in on the aliens, let's do it, let's fucking rock and roll. But George Lucas decided he didn't like the vibe and tone of it, demanded a rewrite. He thought it was too serious. He didn't like the way the lore of the UFOs and whatever these extra somewhere something beings are, whether it's extraterrestrial, extra dimensional, extra whatever. He didn't like the way they were being depicted, and supposedly the rewrite basically became a lot more humor, a lot more action. It introduced Shia LaBeouf's character as the son, and to be honest, like, I haven't seen both scripts, but reading the headline bullet point, main things he changed and injected into it and took out, it sounds like it was Lucas that kind of fucked it all up.
Just had a thought when you was saying your point there about the comparison to the Mummy, and yeah, you're bang on. Like, Ray Winstone's character would be comparable to Benny, you know, the lovable rogue running around double-crossing everyone who's an annoying prick. Do you know what I mean?
The skull was stolen from Akator in the 15th century. There may be hundreds of skulls at Akator, perhaps thousands. Whoever finds them will control the greatest natural force the world has ever known. Power over the mind of man.
Behind the Iron Curtain, a new kind of warfare brews. Not with bullets or bombs, but with the mind. Soviet scientists, deep in shadowy laboratories, conduct chilling experiments in telepathy, clairvoyance, and so-called remote viewing. Can the Kremlin's top operatives truly see across continents, using nothing but thought? From secret bunkers in Siberia to classified facilities in Leningrad, the Red Menace seeks to weaponize the human psyche. Is it madness or the future of espionage? Stay alert, citizens, because the next war might be waged in the mind.
Cate Blanchett, villain character, compared to the brilliant villain in the first film. But then again, saying that, Declan, the Nazis are the greatest villains in the world. So, like, well, then so again are the Soviets. So
True, but the Soviets are a close second. Like, the Soviets, especially in cinema depiction, whether it was a serious film or a schlocky action film, they were the fucking bad guys for a good 30, 40 years of cinema. Remember, I'm not defending the actual movie. The movie stinks. But I'm saying it's not a worthless piece of shit. It wasn't destined to be shit. The premise was brilliant. And Cate Blanchett's villain is another example of that. Because again, okay, so it's not going to be a Nazi who's obsessed with the occult and he's searching out for these rare artifacts so that he can ensure that the Third Reich reigns forever. We have a Soviet officer who is a psychic, and this again draws on real conspiracies and later confirmed fact, if you trust leaked CIA docs. There was in fact a psychic program within the Soviet Union, and when the Americans discovered it, they said, well, even if it sounds like fucking horseshit, we got to allocate some money to this and set up our own program just in case it's real. We can't fall behind in that area. That could be a genuine game changer in the whole superpower battle.
Tonight, newly declassified documents from the Central Intelligence Agency are shedding light on a once-secret Cold War initiative known as Project Stargate. For over 2 decades, U.S. intelligence agencies reportedly experimented with so-called remote viewing, the use of psychic perception to gather information about distant or hidden targets. The program, once dismissed as fringe science, was quietly shut down in the 1990s. But with thousands of pages now available to the public, questions are being raised once again about how far the government was willing to go in the name of national security.
So again, it's drawing on all these brilliant real-life things from that era. If Indiana Jones was a real guy and he actually lived to see the 50s, he would be doing this shit. There weren't no Nazis anymore. No one gives a fuck about the Holy Grail or the fucking Ark of the Covenant. It's about UFO shit, so bang. That's my defense of this film. On execution and delivery, a giant pile of shit. Trust me, I was as upset as anyone when I went to the cinema back in 2008 to see this film. But the intentions were good. The premise made sense. Taking that leap of transporting it into the 50s, changing the lore, changing the main sort of archetype villain that you're dealing with was all, I think, fucking genius. I honestly think that was inspired. It could have breathed completely new life into the trilogy. It could have spawned a new trilogy. 2 that are very separate, but still has that consistent tone and consistent characters. Harrison Ford playing Indiana Jones. The execution was awful, but there's the ingredients of a great film in there.
What was the whole element with Shia LaBeouf? What I thought was going to happen, he was going to become the heir apparent to Indiana Jones, and the newer films would have been him going forwards. But I guess, did it coincide with after he went batshit crazy and essentially got cancelled that they had to close down that avenue?
Well, I mean, they definitely left the door open. The same way, even if there's no plans to do a sequel, or no one involved necessarily wants to do a sequel, certain films just have a bit of sequel bait at the end, just in case. And it definitely had a bit of, hey, Shia LaBeouf's going to be the new Indiana Jones bait at the end in that way. The thing is, the film didn't do well, so that was never going to happen either way. And also, Shia LaBeouf, I actually think is a fucking phenomenal actor and a very compelling presence. I really like any film he's in. Like, he's always really watchable, really good. But people fucking hate his guts. He was going through a post-Titanic DiCaprio era without having any of the success DiCaprio had before Titanic. Every guy fucking just hated Shia LaBeouf's guts before he went completely mental as well. So it was good casting in the sense that he is a star, but it was going to be a hard sell even if the film was a success, let alone the fact that it ended up being a horrendous flop.
My problem with it is they should have left it with The Last Crusade, which was a great film. I don't care.
But you only say that because they weren't good after that.
Yeah, but
what if they'd been amazing and you would, like, what if you said that after the first film and you didn't get the next 2 films?
But my problem is the character who's our hero, I'm sorry to say it, but they're just simply too old to be doing this shit.
Yeah, literally too old for this shit. You know what? You're right to an extent. Like, it's when they do these when people are just too old and they keep bringing them out. Terminator Dark Fate, where you got like 90-year-old Sarah Connor, and it's just like, wait, like, no one wants to see this shit. But he wasn't that old in 2008. He didn't look that old anyway. He still had that gruff older man thing. The latest Indiana Jones film, he looked like he could shit his pants in every scene.
He looked like he'd be in a wheelchair.
Yeah, he had that gaunt, he now has false teeth, so his lips curling sort of look to his face. That was ridiculous. Anytime he punched someone and his fingers didn't disintegrate, it was ridiculous.
What I want to know is, if it was such a great premise as you make out it is, why did did it fail? Whose fault? Script, the direction? You've already picked up on some of the acting performances of Ray Winstone being a weak link.
No, I'm not criticising his performance. He's just doing his Ray Winston thing that he does. It's the script.
Okay.
The fine details of the script are awful. The premise is great. The story is great. George Lucas on those parts, top banana, 2 thumbs up. Great job. But judging by what he supposedly didn't like about the previous draft and rejected and changed for the final draft, I'm kind of leaning towards him. But I'm going to actually blame all 3 of them because they all had the veto. Look, no one aims to make a bad film, but they were aiming to make an Indiana Jones film. It might sound like a small point, but the fact that they didn't even have a mini story before the story just kind of tells me that maybe too much time had passed and they didn't even really know what an Indiana Jones film was supposed to be anymore.
Would you be sitting here and thinking, yes, I'm glad they made it so I could watch it and look at the final product? Or would you rather they didn't make it at all so you could just look at that script and be like, this is a really cool script. I hope one day they make it.
That's an interesting point. If this was just a sort of rumoured premise that they were gonna do at one point, then fuck yeah, that would have been cool as shit. Because I would have heard it in my little dork sleuthing on the internet that you do. Like we always say, a trailer will always make a film seem better than it's going to be because your imagination fills in all the gaps. My imagination would have been filling in everything. The whole thing's a gap because it didn't get made. So having the idea in my head of what that film could have been would have been much more entertainment than the shit we actually got.
So, as the lights flicker in the night sky and whispers of the unknown echo through deserts, jungles, and laboratory halls, one truth remains. The strange is stranger than ever. From flying discs to psychic spies, crystal skulls to cosmic doorways, the boundaries of reality are bending, folks. Science calls it speculation. The papers call it hysteria. But out there, somewhere, the truth may be waiting, watching, or already here. This is your correspondent signing off and reminding you to keep your feet on the ground and your eyes on the stars.